The phone lit up with her name while I was rinsing a coffee mug I didn't even need. 8 years. I stood there with water running over my hand, watching it buzz like it had every right to be in my life again. No warning. No message first. Just her name, plain as anything. I almost let it ring out. I actually turned the tap off, dried my hand, and set the phone face down on the counter. Then it kept vibrating. Slow, steady, patient. That part felt familiar. I picked it up on the fourth ring. Hello. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough to remind me I knew that silence. Then she said my name. Same voice. Older, maybe. Or maybe I just heard it differently. I've been meaning to call for a long time. I leaned against the counter, thumb resting on the edge of the phone. Okay. Another pause. A breath I could hear this time. I'm sorry, she said. For what I said. For how I handled everything. I was wrong. No excuses. No but. She said it clean. I watched a drop of water slide off the mug and hit the sink. I know what it cost you, she added. And I should have said this years ago. That should have mattered. It didn't. I waited for something to hit me. Anger. Relief. Anything I'd spent years imagining. Nothing came. Just her voice. And the sound of my own breathing, steady like nothing had changed. And that's when it clicked. The call finally came. But it didn't reach the version of me that had been waiting for it. I didn't leave because of one fight. That's the part people always get wrong. It sounds cleaner that way. Easier to explain. One bad night, one line too far, and everything breaks. But it wasn't like that. It stacked. Year after year. Small things that never got resolved. Bigger things that got pushed aside until they turned into something else. The last argument just gave us shape. It happened in her kitchen. Same place we'd had 100 normal conversations before. Same table. Same chair I always took without thinking. I remember tapping my fingers against the edge of it while she talked. She wasn't yelling at first. Just firm. Certain. You're making a mistake, she said. You always do this. You rush into things without thinking. I'll let that sit for a second. I've been planning this for months. That doesn't mean it's smart. I picked up my phone, turned it over in my hand, then set it back down. It's my decision. She gave a short laugh. Not amused. That's exactly the problem. That was familiar too. The way she could take something simple and make it feel like a flaw. I looked at her, try to keep it even. You don't have to agree with it. I don't, she said. And I'm not going to pretend I do just to make you feel better. I nodded once. Okay. That should have ended it. It didn't. She stepped closer to the table, palms flat against it. You think you know better now, she said. But you don't. You're still the same. You just don't listen anymore. I felt that land. Not loud. Just steady. I listen, I said. I just don't always do what you want. That's not the same thing. No, I said. It isn't. We stayed there like that for a second. Not shouting. Just locked in it. Then she said it. Fine. Go do whatever you want. Just don't expect me to support it when it falls apart. I pushed my chair back a few inches. It scraped against the floor, louder than anything either of us had said. I wasn't asking you to. She crossed her arms. You always are. You just don't say it out loud. I shook my head, grabbed my jacket off the back of the chair. That's not true. It is, she said. And when this goes wrong, and it will, don't come back here acting like I owe you anything. I stopped halfway to the door. Something about that line. Not the words. The certainty. I turned back. I'm not coming back, I said. She didn't react. Not really. Just held my eye like she was waiting for me to take it back. I didn't. Good, she said. Then we understand each other. That was the moment I expected everything to hit. It didn't. I opened the door, stepped out, and closed it behind me like I was leaving any other day. No scene. No second thoughts. Just the sound of the latch catching. The air outside felt colder than it should have. I remember pulling my jacket tighter as I walked to my car, keys already in my hand. I sat there for a second before starting it. Not because I was hesitating, just letting it settle. I half expected my phone to ring before I backed out of the driveway. Some version of her calling me back. Softening it. Fixing the edge of what she said. It stayed quiet. I drove home. That night, I replayed the conversation more than once. Not everything. Just certain lines. The ones that stuck. Don't come back. You always are. Good. I thought I'd feel worse. I didn't. That was new. The next morning, I woke up, made coffee, and checked my phone without thinking. Nothing from her. No message. No missed call. No follow-up. Just nothing. I set the phone down, took a sip, and leaned against the counter. That silence should have felt heavy. It didn't. It felt clear. I went to work, took meetings, answered emails, said yes to things I would have overthought before. It was all strangely easy, like something had been removed. A few days passed, then a week. Still nothing. At some point, I realized I wasn't waiting for it anymore. No checking my phone every hour. No replaying what I would say if she reached out. Just moving. I signed the lease on a new place a month later. Smaller than what she would have approved of. Different area. Different kind of life. I remember standing in the empty living room, keys in my hand, looking around at walls that didn't carry anything from before. No history. No expectations. Just space. I set my bag down by the door, walked over to the window, and opened it. Cold air came in. Clean. I stayed there for a second, hands resting on the sill. Then I pulled my phone out of my pocket and looked at it. Still nothing. I turned it face down on the counter. And that's when it really started. Not the silence. The life that filled it. The quiet didn't feel like loss. That surprised me more than anything. I'd spent years assuming I'd carry it around. That would sit somewhere in the background of everything I did. A missing piece you keep noticing. It wasn't like that. It was quieter, cleaner. I moved into that apartment and built something that didn't involve explaining myself to anyone. New routine, new habits. I bought cheap furniture and didn't ask if it made sense. Ate at weird times. Left dishes in the sink overnight and didn't hear a voice in my head correcting it. Small things. They added up. Work picked up not long after. I've been stuck in a position that felt temporary for too long. Saying yes to things I didn't fully believe in, just to keep things steady. That changed. I started pushing back. Taking on projects I would have avoided before. Not to prove anything, just because I could. One of them turned into a promotion 6 months later. I remember sitting in my manager's office, nodding while he explained the new role. More responsibility, better pay, the kind of step forward I've been circling for years. Think you're ready for it? He asked. Yeah, I said. No hesitation. That was new too. I called a few friends that night. Not a big group. Just people who had been around long enough to notice the shift without needing it explained. We went out. Nothing dramatic. Food, a couple drinks, normal conversation. At one point, my friend Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching me. You're different, he said. I shrugged. Ow, quieter, he said, but not in a bad way. I picked up my glass, turned it slightly in my hand. Feels quieter, I said. He nodded like that made sense. We moved on. I met Sarah about a year after I moved out. 32. Worked in interior design. The kind of person who noticed things most people didn't. Not in a critical way. Just aware. We met through a mutual friend at a small dinner. Nothing planned. I almost didn't go. She sat across from me, asked simple questions, actually listened to the answers. No edge. No testing. At one point she said, "You seem like someone who thinks before he speaks." I gave a small smile. Sometimes. That's not what I meant, she said. I tapped my fork lightly against the plate, thinking about that. She didn't push it further. That was the thing with her. She let things sit. We started seeing each other a few weeks later. Slow. No pressure. No need to define it immediately. The first time she came over to my place, she walked in, looked around once, then set her bag down by the door like she already understood the space. Feels like you, she said. I leaned against the counter. That good or bad? She smiled a little. Just clear. That word again. Clear. We built something steady. Not intense. Not complicated. Just consistent. Conversations that didn't turn into arguments. Disagreements that didn't feel like threats. I didn't realize how much of that I'd been missing until I didn't have to deal with it anymore. At some point, I told her about my mother. Not everything. Just the outline. We don't talk, I said. Haven't for a while. She nodded. You want to? I thought about it for a second. No. She didn't ask why. That mattered. Years passed like that. Not fast. Not slow. Just moving. Sometimes something would bring it back for a second. A comment from someone about family. A holiday conversation that shifted in a direction I didn't follow. Once, at a coworker's birthday, someone asked casually, "You seeing your parents this weekend?" I shook my head. No. They started to ask more. I could see it coming. I cut it off clean. We're not close. That ended it. I went back to my drink, watched the condensation slide down the glass. That should have felt heavier. It didn't. There were moments early on when I thought about what I'd say if she called. Not full conversations. Just fragments. Lines I'd land on if I got the chance. You should have listened. You don't get to fix this now. I didn't need you then. They felt sharp at the time. Necessary. I'd run through them while driving. Or standing in line somewhere. Just enough to feel like I had control over something that hadn't happened yet. Then it faded. Not all at once. Just less often. Weeks without thinking about it. Then months. At some point, I realized I didn't have anything prepared anymore. No speech. No version of closure waiting in my head. Just space where that used to be. One evening, a few years in, Sarah and I were sitting on the floor in the living room. She had a notebook open, sketching ideas for rearranging the space. I was scrolling through something on my phone, half paying attention. "You ever think about calling her?" she asked without looking up. I set the phone down on my knee. No, not even a little. I reached over, picked up one of her pencils, rolled it between my fingers. "I used to," I said. "Not anymore." She nodded, made a small mark on the page. Okay. No follow-up. No advice. Just acceptance. I handed the pencil back, leaned my head against the wall behind me. That was the difference. No one trying to push it into a shape it didn't need to take. No one telling me what I should feel about it. I thought I'd carry the absence with me. I didn't. I replaced it. Quietly. Without noticing. And somewhere along the way, the version of me that had been waiting for her to call stopped waiting. The call ended without either of us knowing how to end it. She said, "Thank you for picking up." I said, "Yeah." Then there was a pause. Not awkward. Just unfinished. "I won't keep you," she added. Okay. Another second. "Take care," she said. "You too." And that was it. The line went quiet. No dramatic goodbye. No shift in tone. Just a clean stop. I lowered the phone slowly, still holding it in my hand. The kitchen felt exactly the same as it had 10 minutes earlier. Same light. Same mug by the sink. Same faint hum of the fridge in the background. I set the phone down on the counter, screen still lit for a second before it went dark. I expected something to follow. A wave. A reaction. Something delayed. Nothing came. I picked up the mug again, turned it slightly, then set it back down without taking a sip. That should have mattered more. It didn't. I walked into the living room, sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on my knees. The call replayed in pieces. Not the whole thing. Just fragments. I was wrong. I know what it cost you. I should have said this years ago. No defensiveness. No redirecting. No version of the past that made her look better. She gave it to me straight. And I believed her. That was the part one hadn't expected. For years, I'd assumed if this moment ever came, I'd have to fight for it. Push through excuses. Correct her version of things. Hold the line until she actually said what needed to be said. I'd built entire conversations around that. None of them happened. She just said it. I leaned back against the couch, eyes on the ceiling. I tried to find a version of me that had needed this. The one who would have held onto every word. Who would have felt it land. I couldn't. He wasn't there anymore. That realization didn't hit hard. It settled. Like noticing something had been moved a long time ago and you just hadn't checked. I rubbed my thumb along the side of my phone, then unlocked it without thinking. No new messages. No follow-up. Just a call log. Her name at the top. Time-stamped like it was any other conversation. I stared at it for a second, then locked the screen again. Sarah walked in from the other room a minute later, wiping her hands on a towel. "Everything okay?" she asked. I looked up. "Yeah." She glanced at the phone on the table. "Who was it?" I picked it up, turned it once in my hand. "My mom." She paused, just for a second. Oh, I nodded. She called. Sarah stepped a little closer, not rushing it. And I exhaled lightly through my nose. She apologized. That was all I said. Sarah studied my face like she was checking for something. How was it? I shrugged. Fine. That answer hung there for a second. She tilted her head slightly. Just fine. I looked down at the phone again, then set it on the table. Yeah, I could tell she was waiting for more. I didn't have more. I thought it would feel different, I added after a moment. Different how? I leaned back, resting my head against the couch. I don't know. Bigger. She nodded slowly. And it didn't? I shook my head. No. She sat down beside me, not too close, not distant either. Just there. That's okay, she said. I'll let that sit. I expected that line to open something up, for me to explain it, break it down, make sense of why it didn't hit the way I thought it would. I didn't. I reached for the remote, turned the TV on without really looking at what was playing. The sound filled the room low. Sarah watched me for a second longer, then leaned back into the couch. We didn't talk about it again that night. That should have bothered me. It didn't. Later, after she went to bed, I stayed up a little longer. Not thinking, just sitting there. The call didn't replay again. No urge to go over it. No need to dissect what she said or what I should have said back. That part was gone too. I picked up my phone once more, opened the call log, and looked at her name again. 8 years. Reduced to one line on a screen. I hovered over it for a second like I might call her back. I didn't. I locked the phone and set it down. For a long time, I thought closure would feel like something arriving. Like a release. Or a shift. Something clear you could point to and say, that's it. It wasn't like that. It was quieter. It felt like realizing you'd already moved on and just hadn't noticed what happened. I leaned back into the couch, eyes half closed, listening to the low sound of the TV. By the time the apology came, I was already someone else. I didn't call her back that night, or the next morning. The world didn't pause waiting for me to decide what to do with it. Work still needed to get done. Emails came in. Meetings stacked up like they always did. I moved through it normally. That was the part that felt strange. I'd always imagined this moment would interrupt everything, that I need time to process it, space to sit with it. Instead, I was answering questions in a meeting while her voice still sat somewhere in the back of my mind, steady and unresolved. At one point, my manager asked, "You going to take lead on this next phase?" I glanced at the document in front of me, then nodded. Yeah, I've got it. No hesitation. I wrote that down after the call ended. Not because it mattered, just noticing it. Later that afternoon, I stepped outside the office with a cup of coffee I didn't really want. The air was cooler than inside, sharp enough to wake me up a little. I stood there, one hand around the cup, watching people pass without really seeing them. My phone was in my pocket. I didn't check it. That should have been harder. It wasn't. I took a sip, let it sit, then set the cup on the railing beside me. For a second, I tried to imagine ignoring it completely, letting her call sit as a one-time thing. A closed loop. She apologized. I heard it. That's it. Clean. Part of me liked that. Simple. No reopening anything. No testing what was left. But another part didn't sit the same way. Not urgent. Not emotional. Just present. Like something unfinished, but not in a way that demanded fixing. I picked the cup back up, turned it slightly in my hand. She hadn't asked for anything. That mattered. No, can we meet? No, I want to make this right. No pressure. Just the apology. I exhaled slowly, watching the breath disappear in the air. If she had asked for more, I would have said no. I knew that. That clarity surprised me. For years, I thought I'd either shut it down completely or fall back into it without thinking. No middle ground. But standing there, I realized there was something in between. Not going back. Not cutting it off. Just deciding what it would be now. That was new. I finished the coffee, even though it had gone a little cold, then headed back inside. The rest of the day moved like any other. Tasks. Conversations. Small decisions that had nothing to do with any of this. That helped. By the time I got home, the weight of the call hadn't grown. It hadn't shifted into something bigger. It stayed exactly what it was. Sarah was in the kitchen when I walked in, cutting something on the counter. She glanced up. "How was the rest of your day?" "Normal," I said. She nodded, slid the knife aside, wiped her hands. "You gonna call her back?" Direct. No build-up. I set my keys down, leaned against the counter across from her. "Probably." She watched me for a second. "Not today." I shook my head. "No." She gave a small nod, like that made sense. "Okay." No push. No suggestion. Just space. I picked up one of the pieces she'd cut, turned it between my fingers, then set it back down. "I don't want to rush it," I said. Sarah leaned back against the counter. "Then don't." That was it. No analysis. No trying to help me frame it. Just letting me decide. That should have made it easier. It didn't. Not immediately. Because for the first time, there wasn't a reaction to fall back on. No anger driving it. No silence forcing it. Just a choice. And I wasn't used to that. Later that night, I sat at the edge of the bed, phone in my hand again. Unlocked. Locked. Unlocked. Her name was still at the top of the call log. Same as before. I hovered over it, thumb resting just above the screen. I thought about what I'd say. Not a speech. Not like before. Just a first line. Nothing came. Not because I didn't have anything to say. Because I didn't need to say it all at once. That was the shift. For years, I thought this conversation had to fix everything or end it completely. That it had to carry the weight of everything that came before. It didn't. It could just be a conversation. I set the phone down on the nightstand, screen facing up this time. Not avoiding it. Just not forcing it. That felt different. I lay back, staring at the ceiling for a second, listening to the quiet of the room. There was no pressure behind my chest. No build-up waiting to release. Just a steady awareness that something had changed direction. Not back to what it was. Forward to something else. And for the first time since the call, I knew what I was going to do. I just wasn't going to do it the way I used to. I called her 2 days later. Not because I'd built up to it. Because I stopped avoiding it. I was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, half-finished email on the screen. I read the same line twice, then closed it without sending. Picked up my phone. Her name was still there. I tapped it before I could overthink it. It rang longer this time. Long enough that I almost ended the call. Then, "Hello." Same voice. I leaned back in a chair, one foot resting against the leg of the table. "Hey." There was a small shift on her end. I could hear it. "I didn't expect you to call back," she said. "Yeah." A second passed. "I'm glad you did." I nodded slightly, even though she couldn't see it. Me too. That wasn't rehearsed. It surprised me as much as it probably surprised her. I picked up a pen from the table, rolled it between my fingers. We didn't rush into anything. No, "How have you been?" right away. No pretending it was normal. Just space. Then she said, quieter this time, "I meant what I said." "I know. You don't have to say anything back," she added. I needed you to hear it." I pressed the pen against the table, then lifted it again. "I did," I said. "That should have been the hard part." It wasn't. There was a pause, but it didn't feel empty. It felt careful. She cleared her throat lightly. "How have you been?" I glanced at the window, light hitting the glass at an angle. "Good," I said. "Really good." "That's good to hear." She didn't question it. Didn't try to measure it. Just accepted it. I shifted in the chair, straightened a stack of papers in front of me that didn't need straightening. "I moved," I added. "A while ago." "Oh." Another pause. "Still in the same city?" "Yeah. Different area." "I see." She didn't ask for details. That was new. We moved through it like that. Small pieces. Nothing forced. I told her about work. Not everything. Just enough. She told me about her health, briefly. Nothing heavy. Just facts. At one point, she said, "I wasn't sure if you'd ever want to talk to me again." I leaned back, looking at the ceiling for a second. I didn't either. That landed. We both let it sit. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I used to replay that night," she said. "Over and over." I lowered my gaze back to the table. "Yeah." "I kept thinking," she continued, "if I had just stopped talking, even 10 seconds earlier." I pressed the pen down, left a small mark on the paper. That wouldn't have fixed it. She didn't respond right away. No, she said after a moment. Probably not. There was something different in her voice. Not defensive, not trying to correct anything, just accepting it. That was new. For a second, I felt something shift. Not big, not overwhelming, just noticeable. I realized I wasn't holding anything back. Not because I was choosing to let it go in that moment, because it wasn't there the same way anymore. I needed to leave, I said. Simple. She didn't interrupt. I know, she said quietly. That line could have meant a lot of things before. This time it didn't. It just sat where it was. I picked up the pen again, then set it down. I'm not looking to go back to how it was, I added. Clear. Direct. She answered without hesitation. I'm not either. That should have felt like a loss. It didn't. It felt honest. We stayed on the phone longer than I expected. Not talking about the past much. Just learning the edges of this new version of things. Careful. Measured. At one point, she laughed at something small I said. It caught me off guard. I smiled, but it didn't pull me in the way it used to. Just a reaction. That was enough. Eventually, the conversation slowed. Not awkward. Just reaching its natural end. I'm glad you called, she said again. Yeah. I glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at the table. Me too. Another pause. This one felt different. Lighter. I don't expect anything from you, she added. I'm here. I let that sit for a second. That's enough, I said. And I meant it. That was the difference. Not forgiveness as a moment. Not closure as a finish line. Just space where something new could exist. I ended the call a minute later. Set the phone down. The room stayed the same. But something had shifted. Not back. Not forward in a way I could define. Just open. And for the first time, that didn't feel like uncertainty. It felt like choice. We didn't start talking every day after that. That would have felt fake. There was no sudden repair. No long message the next morning. No version of the story where 8 years folded in on themselves and disappeared because we finally said the right things. It moved slower than that. A week passed before we spoke again. Then another. Sometimes it was a short call. 10 minutes. 15. Just enough to confirm the line was still there. Sometimes she'd ask about work. Sometimes I'd ask how she was sleeping, how the doctor's appointment went, whether she ever fixed a leak she used to ignore until it got expensive. Small things. Ordinary things. That was strange at first. Not because they felt wrong. Because they felt possible. I kept waiting for the old rhythm to come back. The one where every conversation had an edge under it. Where a simple comment could turn into a criticism if you gave it enough time. It didn't happen. Not at first. Then one evening it almost did. She'd asked about Sarah. Just casually. You've been together a while now. Yeah, I said. A few years. That's serious. I was standing at the kitchen counter, folding the corner of a receipt without meaning to. Yeah. She paused. Then she said, I wish I'd known her sooner. Not dramatic. Not loaded. But there was something in it. A pull backward. The kind of line that could open a door to everything we missed. I looked down at the paper in my hand, smoothed it flat again. You didn't, I said. Not cold. Just true. It was a short silence. Then she said, no, I didn't. And that was it. No spiral. No guilt turned into pressure. No attempt to make me comfort her for the time that was gone. That mattered more than I expected. Because the rebuilding wasn't in the big moments. It was in those small places where the old version of us could have taken over and didn't. That's how I knew it was real. Sarah noticed it before I said much about it. One Sunday morning, she was pouring coffee while I stood by the window, checking something on my phone. You talked to her yesterday? She asked. I looked up. Yeah. How'd you know? She slid the mug toward me. You don't look drained after. I let out a quiet laugh. That obvious? A little. I picked up the mug, felt the heat through the ceramic. That should have stung. It didn't. Because she was right. For years, any thought of my mother came with tension built into it. Even in silence, there was pressure. A whole conversation happening in my head before anything had actually happened. Now it was different. Not easy. Not healed in some neat, complete way. Just lighter. I leaned against the counter and took a sip. "She's trying," I said. Sarah nodded once. "Sounds like it." I turned the mug slightly in my hands. "I think I am too." She smiled, small and tired and warm all at once. "Yeah," she said. "Sounds like that too." It stayed fragile. I don't want to fake that part. There were still careful pauses. Still moments where one of us would say something and the other would go quiet for half a second, measuring it before answering. Still whole sections of the past we didn't touch because neither of us was pretending one apology erased them. But that honesty helped. We were trying to rebuild what we had. That would have been impossible. Too much of it had been built on roles and neither of us fit anymore. Her needing to be right. Me needing her to finally see what she was doing. That version of us had run its course. What came after was smaller, less certain, better. A few months in, I met her for lunch. Neutral place. Small cafe halfway between where we each lived. Nothing sentimental about it. No returning to her house. No symbolic ground. I got there first. Sat near the window. Checked my phone once. Then put it away. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately. Of course I did. But age had reached her in ways I hadn't prepared for. Not dramatically, just enough to remind me that time had been passing for both of us, even while we were frozen out of each other's lives. She saw me, gave a small wave, and came over. "Hi," she said. "Hi." We stood there for half a second like strangers deciding whether to hug. We didn't. She sat down, adjusted the strap of her bag against the chair, glanced at the menu even though she clearly wasn't reading it. That almost made me smile. Not because it was funny, because it was human. We ordered coffee for me, tea for her, something light neither of us seemed especially invested in. And then we talked, not about the fight, not right away, about traffic, work, her neighbor's dog that barked at everything, Sarah's new project, a place I'd gone recently that she remembered from years ago before it got renovated into something more expensive and less interesting. Nothing about it felt like a movie reunion. Thank God. It felt better than that. Real people don't get 8 years back in one clean scene. They sit across from each other and figure out whether the conversation can survive the next 10 minutes. Ours did. At one point, she looked at me over the rim of her cup and said, "You seem happy." I tapped my finger once against the handle of mine. "I am." She held my eye for a second, then nodded. "I'm glad." No envy. No sadness sharpened into guilt. Just a fact she was letting herself see. That line stayed with me. Because years earlier, I don't know if she could have said it without hearing an accusation inside it. Like my happiness had to be a judgment on her. Like my life, without her in it had to mean something about what she'd lost. Maybe it did, but she didn't make me carry that for her. That was new. We left an hour later. Outside, the air had turned cooler. People passed behind us without paying any attention. She adjusted her coat sleeve, glanced toward the parking lot, then back at me. "This was good," she said. "Yeah," I said. "It was." She nodded once. "I know this doesn't fix anything." I put my hands in my pockets. "No." A small, tight smile. "But I'm glad we did it." I looked at her for a second. Really looked. The woman in front of me wasn't the one I left in that kitchen 8 years earlier. And I wasn't the son who drove away thinking silence would either break me or prove something. We'd both missed too much for that. "I am too," I said. That was enough. We said goodbye and went to our separate cars. No hug. No promise about next time. Nothing polished. Just a real ending to a real afternoon. And somehow that made me trust it more. We still talk now. Not constantly. Not out of obligation. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes one of us says the wrong thing and we both have to decide in real time whether we're going to fall back into old habits or stay where we are. So far, we stay. That's the work of it. Not erasing what happened. Not pretending the apology arrived on time. Just building something honest enough to survive the truth. For a long time, I thought the call I'd waited for would save a version of me I couldn't stop thinking about. It didn't. He was already gone by then. What it did instead was stranger and maybe better. It met the person I became after waiting, and he knew what to do with it. I didn't get the ending I used to rehearse. I got something quieter. A mother who finally said she was wrong. A son who could hear it without falling apart. And a relationship that only started becoming real after the old one ended. I still think about that first call sometimes. Her name on the screen. The mug by the sink. The way I stood there expecting a door to open back into the past. It didn't. Nothing went back to how it was. And that was the point. I kept the receipt from that lunch in my wallet for a while. Not because it meant more than it did. Just because some things matter most after they stop needing to save you. If a story like this sits a little too close, you already know how quiet these things can be. Where silence ends is where I tell the ones that don't leave clean. And I'm curious, if an apology came years too late, would you still want to hear it?